Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished storyteller from Noida, Delhi, India, Sunita Pant Bansal. Sunita, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted, absolutely delighted to be part of this show because I saw a couple of episodes and I was quite impressed. Thank you for calling me.
Thank you. Sunita, in her own words, is a storyteller and a mythologist. For over 4 decades, she has donned multiple hats as a writer, editor, publisher, and an entrepreneur. She has authored 30 books for adults and young adults, decoding the philosophy of mythology, and 1,000 books for children on folk literature and scriptures. And I must add at this point that I ordered 10 of her books for children for my little 2-year-old granddaughter. And these books are absolutely outstanding. And given the amazing work Sunita has been doing, understandably, she's been recognized, felicitated, and awarded several times. So, Sunita, my first question, tell me a little bit about your own amazing journey in brief, and what got you interested in writing, and that too focusing on mythology.
In brief is the key here. So I'll try my best to be brief. My writing journey started when I was in school. Mm-hmm. So I was in class 2, and that's when I wrote my first poem. And I always mention this for the simple reason that I remember our English teacher, Mrs. Beecham, had she not encouraged me, had she not published that little poem of mine, I wouldn't have been here, because children need encouragement to start blooming. So that was the start of my writing. And then, of course, in school, I continued writing for the school magazine. I even had, with my friends, we even made a little kind of a tabloid, a 2-sheeter, which we would kind of compile news and sell for 10 paisa to, the rest of the students and so on. So it was fun. But college years, I didn't write as much because I was busy studying. But I never took writing seriously in the sense of a profession, because in our time, writing was not even a profession. It was like science and humanities and commerce and all. So I did not take it seriously. So college was like studying nutrition and becoming a dietitian. But then writing didn't leave me, because while I was counseling, one of my patients suggested that I should write what I'm counseling, because a whole lot of patients didn't know what to eat, because the instructions from the doctors are pretty generic. So I started writing, and I was about 20 when I started writing professionally, because that's when I started writing columns and articles for newspapers, magazines, and so on. So that's when commercial writing happened, and then it hasn't stopped since. And then, of course, lots of things happened in my life. I joined Times of India, and I was, I set up a tabloid, a weekend, tabloid for them. And so it just went on. So at that time also, I never considered myself to be a writer, somehow. I thought I was in Times of India, so I was obviously a journalist, because I used to do some interviews and reports and stuff like that. It never struck me that the word writer was not there somewhere, because it was not given that kind of importance. So, then finally, I took a break, and then when I came back, I joined a very renowned educational publishing house, and I was the editor-in-chief, and after 1 year, and that was a textbook publishing house. So I entered editing of textbooks. And then, they set up their own range of children's books. And I was about 29 then, and I became a partner. And that started writing actually for children. And when I was writing those books, I realized how there is a dearth of books for children, talking about our own culture, our own, even folk tales for that matter. Mythology was like way behind, but even our own folk tales were not really looked into. So that's how the whole thing, continued. Then I took left that and set up my own company. And that's when I, handled all forms of media. We used to make CD-ROMs and short films and everything, whatever you can think of in media for our clients. And for 16 years, I ran my company. After that, I realized that the writing that I had started was not really, it was not satisfying because you're satisfying your clients. So somewhere down the line, you're not really satisfying your own self. So I shut down my company about 10 years back, and I kind of got into writing full time. And that's when talking. I mean, for me, writing is talking to my readers, and that's when I really got to actually talking to my readers. And it was not meant for. I never thought that I'm going to go to a publisher, get them published. I just wanted to write. I just wanted to, let it out, talk and talk. And so, and that's it. And Rupa got in touch with me, and then my journey into actual, relating mythology to everyday life actually started. So, I mean, it's as I said, it's a long journey, and good fun, extremely gratifying.
Absolutely. And as they say, the rest is history. The pun on the word history. But my next question for you, Sunita, is that I completely agree with you that there wasn't enough and there still needs to be much more.
Oh, yes.
But what are some of the lessons you want your readers to take away from mythology?
Okay, let me, the question you put is very kind of straightforward, but I'll try to explain it. I will not give a straightforward answer. You see, what happens is people have a tendency to, when they write for children, a lot of them I find, because I was an editor too, remember. So, people would write as though they're sitting here and the child is sitting there. And, there's kind of giving a lecture. And those things I firmly believe cannot be appreciated. So the first thing is to chat, talk to the reader and talk at that level, sit at that level and talk to them. And that's when, you kind of strike a chord, and then you speak to them in their language. So these are the, first and foremost things that you have to do before you actually get down to talking about a particular subject. So when you talk of mythology, what do you learn? Now, my grandmother always, she was the one who started this thing of storytelling, and she would normalize gods. So for the longest of time, it never occurred to me that gods were to be put on a pedestal and prayed to, so for me, there were stories, and through the stories, I felt that gods are the same as us. So they have the same problems. I mean, you see, in the couples, like the Parvati getting upset, and so it's like normal couple, wife getting upset and then going to her mother's place and so on. I mean, all these things are so normal. So I felt that if we talk to children about gods in a very normal manner, then they would learn how to behave with each other, how to treat each other, how to handle situations, and how to respect the elders, and so on and so forth. What you actually get to read in the mythological stories. So if you remove the sacredness of it, and if you normalize it, then I can tell you, you learn a lot. It's not just one lesson, but there's like millions and zillions of lessons.
Correct. Yeah. Very well said. Great response. But then the other aspect that always comes out for authors is how do you balance what is perceived to be either historical or what's written in our scriptures, the accuracy of that, with the creative freedom required to make a lot of these stories relevant today?
Oh, that's actually not difficult. If you are creative, then you are able to do it. And as far as authenticity is concerned, again, it's very interesting. We have 18 Purans, and in those 18 Purans, you have a Vishnu Puran, and Brahma Puran, and a Shiv Puran. They all talk about the origin of the universe, and in all of them, the name of the Puran. If the name of the Puran is Shiv, Shiv is the hero. He's the protagonist. He started it all. So in Vishnu Puran, Vishnu started it all. So when our own scriptures are telling us that every god is the same, that there's only one principle, then there is no question in terms of, questioning the accuracy, because I could be consulting a Shiv Puran to tell my story. Somebody else would be consulting a Vishnu Puran. Correct. So these kind of things come up, and this is how I tell them that, look, there is nothing written in stone that, this is the historical fact. These are stories that are interchangeable also. So, but then the moment I get into the genre of historical fiction, that's when I have to be very careful. Then I have to create a timeline. and then I have to map my story on the timeline and so on. So historical fiction is something else, but Hindu mythology is extremely, extremely flexible.
Correct. But
Yeah.
my follow-up question is that what role does mythology play in shaping the cultural and ethical framework in today's society?
If you cultural and ethical, like for instance, if you see Gita, I mean the book that I wrote based in Gita, based in Krishna, the management guru, you know, uh, if you read that, you'll find that whatever Krishna did, if you just about emulate that, if you can understand what he did and why he did, the entire fabric, the cultural, the ethical fabric changes. You then understand what morality is, then you understand what ethics are, so that is where the mythology is so useful. So I was very happy when I was asked by the publisher to write such a book, Krishna the Management Guru, because there I've taken out stories from Krishna's life, not just Gita, to explain how he perceives a thing, and then he explains it to whoever, and then through the story. And in any case, when you're reading a story, you understand the principle better.
Correct.
It's if I start talking about philosophy, you'll probably doze off, or everybody else. So what happens is, if you just tell a story, explaining the philosophy, if you kind of bring it down to the level of story, then you'll permanently retain that. So that's the beauty of mythology, and that's why mythology is there. Otherwise, people would have been stuck with Vedas and Upanishads, because that's where philosophy is. But the moment Puranas came, the Purans, they added stories to explain the philosophy that was there in Vedas and Purana, the Upanishads. So that's been what Indians have been doing forever. It's a country of storytellers.
Absolutely.
Entire education was based on storytelling.
Absolutely, very well said. But coming now to the Vedas and the Upanishads, and you said there's a lot of knowledge there,
Yes.
which is being demystified a lot by the Purans. How do you approach the task of demystifying the complex scriptures of the Vedas and the Upanishads for the common individual?
As I said, that has already been done in the Purans. So, like for instance, I've just finished writing a book where I've actually given all the possible Hindu scriptures in the essence of all of them. So it's easy for a person to understand, okay, this is Veda, because all of them have philosophies which cannot be explained unless and until you have a story to explain it with. So that is something which the Puranas do. And simplification happens only when you understand it. Nobody can simplify if they don't understand. You cannot. Correct. So when you're teaching mathematics, you have to understand it first to actually, before you start teaching, students. It's the same thing. You understand the philosophy, then you can, explain it in so many ways. Like Gita, for instance, it's like when you speak with your children and you're trying to tell them to do a certain thing or not do a certain thing. And if you give them examples as to how doing a certain thing has, the kind of effects it brings, and how not doing, what happens then, the entire karmic principle on which which is the backbone of Hindu philosophy, then they understand better. So if I have understood, and rest assured, I can explain it to any age group in any manner that age group would want to be explained. Children like stories, even adults like stories. I'm sure the books that you read of mine, the story elements you'll remember forever. Absolutely. The rest of the philosophy you may not remember after, say, a couple of months. So stories are very effective. Stories are extremely effective. You put any philosophy, convert it into a story, and you're successful.
True. And if I was to ask you the next question on how do you think the mythological stories that we have, what kind of solutions can they offer to modern day challenges, such as mental health or social justice issues? And if you have an example, I'd love that story.
Example, there are lots of things. I mean, this question has been asked, by many young people. And many of the programs, they ask me like about depression, for instance, because that's something which is happening. I mean, everywhere, everyone seems to be depressed. I mean, it's crazy. The whole thing is very crazy. That how is it that suddenly the depression is on rise? So that's when, when you start explaining, when you start treating or you start giving counseling, and if you can, make the person understand the impermanence of life, the impermanence of relationships, then it becomes easier for the person to understand that, if every relationship is impermanent, then where is the point in hanging on to one particular person or a relationship or a thing? So this is how, you use mythology, or you use the philosophy. I wouldn't say mythology here, but I would say the Hindu philosophy, and which comes from Gita, which, which talks to you about detachment, which tells you that how detachment is effective, that while you are detached, you can still achieve the highest of goals. In fact, when you are detached, you are able to do much more and be much more efficient in terms of achieving your goals, because you're not attached to the fruit, you're not attached to people who are trying to pull you down, or you're not attached to the trolling that is happening. Like if you're focused onto becoming whatever you want, and then if you get bothered by the social media, the trolls, you will never get there. So you have to have that detached mindset where you're not concerned with what other people are saying. So these are the little tips that you actually get. These are the nuggets that our Hindu philosophy has, which I try to talk explain to people in their context. Whatever they are saying. If it's a housewife, it'll be a different context. If it's a student, it'll be a different context. Depending on the age group, the young people, they have totally different contexts. So it's actually, it varies. It is so flexible. It is so beautiful that it fits, like all sizes. It's for
Correct.
everyone.
Correct.
And it's extremely contextual. So it's the perception is contextual. It cannot be otherwise. I'm not saying anything new. I'm saying something I'm picking something from you to clean it up and give it back to you. Polish it and give it back to you. So it works like that.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
One more question relating to mythology and history with real life, and then I want to talk a little bit about all the books you've written for children. You spoke, Sunita, a few minutes back about your new book, Krishna the Management Guru. Tell me a little bit more about this book and its relevance in today's management practices.
Yeah, this book, you see, for instance, let me go to the topic itself, Krishna the Management Guru. Now here I'm saying that take Krishna as a CEO of a company, if you are a professional. But if you are looking at Krishna as a personal friend, then management happens all the time in our life. It's not only limited to our workspace. So, for instance, leadership. Now if you read the book, you will get you'll understand the style of Krishna's leadership, as to how he kind of had a vision, how he had a focus, and how he built a team. Now these are all things that you need to be a good professional. Team building, team spirit, teamwork, all that is important. Work life balance, all that comes from the book. How he was trying to explain, and the best thing is, main thing I would say, because the book is pretty big. Now the main thing is power. Now that is something which people don't understand. So the leaders, how they would understand they will understand Krishna's approach to balancing power and humility. Now that is something which you get from understanding Krishna. For instance, I would say that what is power? Power is the ability to help others. Now Krishna, I showed in the book how he was helping, and how there was certain, I shouldn't use the word compromise, but the case of Kalyanag, when Kalyanag was selling the water, making the water poisonous. Krishna could have easily killed the Kalyanag, but what did he do? He first danced on his on Kalyanag's hoods and kind of made him highly, highly uncomfortable. And at the end of it, what happened? When Kalyanag said that, please let me be, I'm sorry. So Krishna made a compromise. He made a deal with him. Let's use the word deal. He made a deal with him. And he said, okay, you leave these waters, you go down to the ocean, you do whatever you want to do there, leave this village and the waters alone. So there was a deal. You see, Krishna wasn't going around killing people to solve a problem. He would find a solution, make a deal. So these are the things, that you actually get from this book. I'm not talking about Krishna as a god who can do anything, but he did because he didn't. He actually walked the talk. He was showing people things. Even the Govardhan Puja, he was showing people things that, why follow superstitions?
Absolutely. And the Mahabharata is full of examples of Krishna stories. Absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah. So now next question. Sorry, go ahead, please.
No. So these are the popular stories that people know, but if they can see it with another perspective, now that's where I come in, Now, Kali and Nag, everybody knows the story. Now, if I'm telling you that this is what happened, then it will somewhere click in your head that, it's important to sit across the table and discuss the issue and find the solution, which is good for both, rather than, okay, because I don't make put fantasy in the story. I would rather make the story resolve some issue, and that's what Krishna did all the time. And so these are the things where I come in, and that's where the creative thing that you were talking about comes in, how you can change the perception of your reader by showing another perspective to the same thing that they have read forever.
Amazing.
That is what.
Amazing. So next few questions, Sunita, for children's literature. And I know I've spoken to many people. I've written myself a lot. Writing for children is a very different cup of tea. And yet when I saw the books that I purchased, 10 of your books, you've written 1,000 of them, they come across so differently. My question is, what are some of the key elements you consider while talking about one of our mythological stories to a very young audience? Because it's, you've written Gita in the Krishna, the Management Guru, which is for adult and senior audiences. And then you've written for children.
Yes. Okay. Here also, I'll give you an example, because you see, answering the question, this is my style also. If I have to say something, I'll give an example.
Absolutely.
Because that example stays. Now, writing for children, of course, is extremely tough. And when I got into it, I realized how, it was. And but then, it was fun also, because you were talking to a small child. So whenever you're writing for children, the thing to keep in mind is how young the child is, your reader is, and what can affect that child's thinking process. And so you have a tremendous responsibility when you're offering any story to a child. And so stories, talking of corporal punishment, for instance, should be avoided, because then you're the child reads a story and thinks that this is the right thing to do. And you don't know, but you've actually seeded the poor little thing that, okay, this is a right approach to any kind of, life.
Correct.
So these are the little things that you have to keep in mind, that you do not show. Though people would disagree with me that, how can you avoid showing violence? But you can couch the words. You don't have to show the gore. You can couch the words. In illustrations, you don't really have to show a person being killed with blood, kind of spreading all over. All that you can avoid. These are all avoidable things. There are other things that one can illustrate. So these are very many things that go into making a book for children. But let me give you an example from a book, a Ramayana that I wrote for 4-year-olds. Okay. Now that age group is extremely sensitive, and why I wrote the book was also because I felt that particular age group does not have, at that point of time when I wrote, they did not have stories from our scriptures, from mythology for that particular age. Somehow those children were getting Red Riding Hood to read, or they were getting, Snow White or Cinderella's and all the Western classics. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Western classics, but I would say that that's not the diet of literature that children should be brought up on all the time. All kinds of literature should be introduced. So that was the reason why I wrote that Ramayana. And in that Ramayana, now there is this instance of in the end, when Ram is sending Sita back with Lakshman to back to the forest because he heard some gossip. Now that was a tricky thing to write, because I still remember as a child that was something which bothered me a lot about Ram. How could he do that? So only when I started studying mythology, that I actually understood, and that's what I always share with my readers.
Right.
So that was the time when Lakshman and Sita, they're on their way to the forest, and Lakshman they stop by next to the river, and that's when Lakshman says that I have to drop you here because that's what my brother has said. And Sita is obviously, understandably, extremely upset, and I'm sure angry too. Now, Sumantra at that point of time, and Lakshman is crying because he doesn't want to leave his sister-in-law, and he does not understand why his brother is doing so. So that was the time when Sumantra, the charioteer, tells him that certain things have to happen because this is like a karmic retribution. So in one of the lives earlier, Ram, this is what happened with Ram, that he, when he was Vishnu, he unfortunately by mistake killed sage's wife. I mean, he entered the house of a sage where the demon, I mean, that's another story where the demons were hiding and so on and so forth. So he, at that point of time, the wife of that old sage dies. And the sage, when he comes and sees the carnage, he curses, Vishnu, and says that, in one of your births in the future, you're going to be separated from your wife. So that separation had to happen because it was a karmic retribution. It was written earlier. So everything that happens in Hindu scriptures, every little bit, it is preordained. It has the reason. So that is something which, when I explained, then it kind of works out that okay, so this had to happen. Then you don't, get upset with Ram, because then you realize that he did something. So these are the things you have to then incorporate. See to it that you incorporate, so that the reader does not form a biased opinion, because you're explaining that this is karmic. Even Ram, when he did something wrong, whenever he did, in whichever life, where he's a god, he also does wrong. He also, has to, reap the fruit of whatever he sows. So these things, you have to keep in mind, and that's what I do.
Amazing. Sunita, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. I just love the way you told me about how one poem in class 2 was published, and that really launched what an amazing writing career. Thank you for talking to me about mythology, about history, about our scriptures. I think what you're doing is really making all future generations understand that there is a lot of lessons, there are a lot of learnings from every single scripture. No matter what we pick up, there is a lot that we have in Hinduism. And thank you also for doing such an amazing amount of work for children. I think they are the people who will bear the burdens of society, and with the right kind of context that comes from our scriptures, I think they will find it so much easier to be able to tackle a lot of challenges that all of us have faced. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. And I always believe that you have to have a strong foundation to bring a strong building. It stands to reason. So that's the reason why I'm trying to build that foundation. I'm trying to strengthen that foundation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.